Hello, and welcome back to the Healthy and Happy podcast series. I'm glad to have you join us today. And we are joined with a special guest, Dr. Terri Bacow, and I am really excited about this conversation. Dr. Bacow is a psychologist in New York and has written a really good and useful book on worry and anxiety, and I'm really excited and think that she's going to have some really helpful things to share with you listeners as we talk about anxiety and worry and maybe some of the other things going on. So Terri, do you want to take a second and introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you for having me. As you mentioned, I'm a psychologist and I work with older adolescents and adults, and I live on the Upper West Side with my family, and I specialize in evidence-based therapy approaches for anxiety and mood disorders and ADHD. And in this book, I decided to focus on worry, especially in young people. So the book, which I hope we'll talk more about later, is targeted to really the young adults and the teenagers that are struggling with anxiety. It's CBT, which I'll talk about in a bit. Cognitive behavior therapy is something that I know quite a bit about, and the book incorporates those strategies.
That's awesome. What again, just a little bit about you personally. How did you decide to go into psychology and kind of share with us a little bit about your journey?
Yes, I trained at Boston University, where they really focus on the kind of intersection between research and clinical practice. And actually at that time, I did a lot of research as a research assistant and as doing my doctoral dissertation and other studies. I really learned quite a bit about cognitive behavior therapy, as well as other approaches, acceptance and commitment therapy, dialectical behavior therapy. I mean, it's alphabet soup. These are all these acronyms
Right.
that really describe approaches to treatment that are informed by science, where they've been tested in the lab and research studies that compared to what we call treatment as usual are found to be more effective.
Yeah. And CBT, ACT, yeah, it is a bit of alphabet soup, but these approaches are easier to validate because they have specific interventions and tools that can be incorporated into research more easily than some of the other models of therapy or intervention. And so it's they're well established and well studied, well validated, and that's really good. So how long have you been practicing?
At this point, over 20 years.
Time goes by fast, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's it's kind of crazy. You wake up and a decade is gone, and wake up and another decade is gone. So it is. It's kind of crazy. So why did you decide to write about anxiety and worry?
Well, it's the number one most diagnosed mental disorder in the United States and beyond. It is the most commonly diagnosed problem, and over 40 million Americans suffer from it, as well as young people. Between the ages of 12 to 17 is when we see sort of an increase in anxiety disorders. And it just so happened that I started writing the book during the pandemic. And I think that was really, oh my gosh, I was stressed out myself. It was just a moment that I felt that this resource was most needed and that people were really struggling more than ever with anxiety and mood disorders.
Why do you think that we see such a pandemic of anxiety, an epidemic of anxiety in our society?
You mean during the pandemic?
Well, and even just in general. I mean, anxiety, like you said, anxiety is just such a problem that so many of our listeners struggle with, right?
So I think, well, obviously we know that there is a genetic piece, so there's a neurobiological piece that runs the family that's highly genetic, highly heritable. But then when you have a stressful environment, it really can combine with the genetic predisposition to bring out the anxiety problem. And I think we live in a culture of perfection where there's so many demand on us, there's so much pressure, pressure to be perfect, to be like everyone else, to perform well. It's a really performative kind of culture that I think we're in right now. And I think that's making everyone incredibly stressed.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think what another thing that sort of compounds that is that we don't, we get so many things going on in our lives that so many people don't do a very good job of taking care of themselves and of filling up their resources. And so they get this imbalance between stressors and resources. And anytime you're in that kind of a situation where your stressors are outweighing your resources, something's going to give. And frequently that something is the development of anxiety, right?
Yes, and burnout is not what anxiety is. But if you are prone to anxiety, you may be more prone to burnout. And I think we're seeing much more of that these days. There's a culture of overwork as well, 60-hour week, and we're just not stopping. And like you said, we're not really taking care of ourselves as much as we used to.
Yeah. How do you define anxiety?
So I think the most crisp definition that I could provide is that it is an overestimation of the likelihood of danger and an underestimation of our ability to cope. We overreact and really freak out, and we underestimate the degree to which we can handle things.
Yeah. Say that again. That was really good. An overestimation of
the likelihood of danger and an underestimation of our ability to cope.
That is a really good definition. I really like that. The easiest definition that I know for anxiety is not as good as that one. But I typically talk about anxiety as worrying about what might happen. Where so often depression is worrying about what has happened, anxiety is worrying about what might happen. But I really like that. I might steal that from you.
But that, like you said, the definition of worry is future oriented. It's making predictions, and a lot of times we make catastrophic predictions. Like we really assume the negative, we assume the worst is going to happen.
Yes. And I also really like that you add an underestimation of our abilities to cope. Because frankly, I think that's a huge issue and a huge problem culturally now, is that, I do think we really underestimate our abilities. And so many of us have the ability to be so much more resilient than we think we do. And so which just exacerbates the problem, right? Because if you're worrying about not being able to meet the challenges, then that just grows the worry, right? What's the difference between normal worry, nervousness, and a clinical anxiousness?
Yes. So normal nervousness is proportional to the situation. It is adaptive. Anxiety protects us from danger. So when danger is present, or you have a test coming up, it is normal to be anxious. It's temporary and proportional. Whereas more problematic anxiety tends to be out of proportion to the situation and more chronic and ongoing. And how you could tell when it becomes really problematic is if it starts interfering in your life. If your anxiety is, occurring on a near daily basis, and you're finding that maybe you're canceling plans, or you're not sleeping as well, or you're not functioning as you normally do, then it's a good moment to seek help.
Yeah, that's a really well said. it's disrupting your life, right? And a lot of people will think that if they're nervous, they have anxiety, and that it's normal to be nervous about things. It's normal to worry about things, but it's not normal to feel like you're at a 9 or a 10 for something that is a 2 or a 3. Now, if you've got a 9 or a 10 issue, then it's proportional to worry at a 9 or a 10, right? But if you've got a 2 or a 3 issue, then you don't want to be reacting physiologically, cognitively, emotionally, as if it were an 8, 9, or a 10, right?
Exactly.
So let's talk about your book a little bit. What would you like the readers to know, or the listeners to know about your book?
Well, the first maybe piece that I'd like to share is that none of us really have time to read these days. Many of us are really busy. Just to be honest, we're just busy. And this book is readable. It could be given as a gift. It's not intimidating. It has spaces to write. There's a journaling part of it. And then the rest of it is sort of bite-sized pieces of information about how CBT strategies can be used to manage anxiety. And so I think that the book is really disarming. And there's also, at times, there's some humor in there. I have a few jokes here and there. So I think it is a really soothing, pleasant way to learn about anxiety, especially if you don't have a lot of time.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I really liked about it as I got into it a little bit is you've done a really good job of taking somebody by the hand and helping them in a very threatening way to be able to break worry down and incorporate some great tools in here. So who is it for?
The book is for tweens, teens, young adults, and everybody else. It could be read by anyone. I mean, it's youth targeted. So there's some reference into there that I think young people would appreciate, but I think that anyone can read it. However, I do think that young adults and teenagers will benefit maybe the most.
Why?
Well, like I said, we're all busy. So stressed out teens, stressed out young adults, they'd like to just pick this up and flip through it. I think they will find it most helpful. And a lot of the topics that I cover, I think are pertinent to young people, including social anxiety, social comparison, insecurity, perfectionism, the pressure we put on ourselves, the degree to which we maybe feel left out or we're comparing ourselves to others. I talk about romantic relationships in the book and about, academic and other kind of pressure that I think these topics are really relevant to what young people are going through.
Absolutely. So, if I was 15 and, which I was about 100 years ago, if I was 15 and worried about dating or worried about fitting in, what might I do?
Well, the first thing you would need to do is sort of recognize that you're not alone, that everyone struggles. And I have a section about this is something we're all going through right now. That's the first step. And then beyond that, I would encourage you as 15 years old to kind of identify whether it's the thought that you're having about the situation, whether the specific worries, when we think about worry, it can be free-floating, but you have to pin it down. You have to really identify the actual interpretation you're making about the situation that's causing you to feel worried. So I would say you have maybe 15, 20, 30 thoughts floating in your mind right now about the situation. What is the one that's trending what's the kind of number one concern that you have. And then once you identify that concern, we can examine it, and we can use CBT methods to examine the evidence, see whether your worry is valid. It might be understandable, but it also may be an overreaction. You might be catastrophizing or overthinking. And then I have techniques to help you change your interpretation.
Yeah, that's so. If I think that that nobody likes me, and say there's a dance coming up, and I would really like to go to the dance, and I'd really like to ask someone out, but I don't, or ask somebody to the dance, but I don't think that anybody's going to want to go with me because I don't think anybody really likes me. What would you do with me?
I would point out that you are personalizing, which is a thinking trap. And you were also self-blaming, you're disqualifying the positive, you're undermining your view of yourself. And you're also mind reading and maybe fortune telling. And fortune telling is when we predict the future. So I would say you're making all these predictions that no one likes you, which is mind reading. You're predicting that an outcome is not going to go well. And you're being really hard on yourself.
Yeah. So what do I do about it?
Pardon?
So what do I do about it?
What you would do is you would challenge the negative thinking. You would examine, do I have any evidence for these thoughts? Sometimes the only evidence we have is that we feel that this might happen. And emotions aren't facts. Feelings are not facts. So I would encourage you to remember the feelings aren't facts, to find more valid sources of evidence, and to not avoid the situation. Avoidance and anxiety are best friends. They really collude with each other. And the more you avoid, the more anxious you get, the more you believe that it's insurmountable. So I encourage all my clients to really face their fears and do what's hard for you. Show up and don't cancel the plan. Don't stay home. Attend the dance. See what happens. And also, if it doesn't work out, we need to reframe that as well. Yeah.
She hit, for you listeners, she hit a couple of things that I think are just absolutely essential that I want to punctuate here. And one of them is that feelings are not facts. One of the facts about our brains is that you can believe something and feel something with a great deal of conviction and be totally wrong. And so just understanding that just because you feel a certain way doesn't mean that is true is so empowering. And one of the ways that I talk about this, Terri, is that we as human beings have the ability to command our thoughts. If I say to you, think about an apple, you can think about an apple, right? Or if I say, think about, French fries, you can think about French fries, right? But if I say to you, hey, I want you to feel embarrassed right now, you can't just feel embarrassed, right? Or I want you to feel really happy right now. You can't just feel. So we as human beings have the ability to command our thoughts, but our feelings are a function of how we're thinking and and how we're interpreting events that are going on in our lives. Just a good basic cognitive cycle, right? Breaking down. And the other thing that she said is, so often we'll have this litany of 20 or 30 thoughts that are just bang, bang, bang. And nobody's going to want to go with me to the dance, and nobody likes me, and nobody's going to want to ride in my car. And then I'm not going to have anything to say. And I don't really have any clothes to wear. And my hair is going to not look good. And so we just start pounding ourselves with all of these thoughts. And if you can stop and slow down and say, okay, what's the core of this? And she also mentioned several cognitive distortions that get in the way, and you can Google cognitive distortions and see what those are, because most of us have a few cognitive distortions that we we like to use over and over and over again. And if you can recognize what they are, then just understanding how your brain works and understanding some of the facts about how we feel and how we think is so empowering and opens up space to make a lot of good change.
Yes, and I think you're bringing up another point, which is about rumination. That sometimes the thoughts blend together and they can be sort of a vicious cycle. We're kind of obsessing over really kind of having a flow of money thoughts at the same time. And what I recommend for that is really some sort of action. So instead of kind of staying in your head and ruminating, to try to take some kind of action to solve the problem. So you could maybe be obsessing about a test that you have, or you could study for it. And now that it's kind of maybe an overly simple example, but there are many things where we're ruminating and nothing's happening, it's not productive. So then I encourage people to make a plan and take some kind of action that can really stop rumination in its tracks.
Yeah, really, really a good point. Because I don't think it's an overly simple, because a lot of times we'll spend lots of time. I mean, I see this with my kids and parenting all the time. We'll argue about doing some task for 3 to 5 minutes, and the task is a minute task, or a 30-second task, and we waste a lot of time worrying about things instead of just doing them. The other thing that you said that I want to make sure to punctuate is that the very worst thing that you can do for anxiety is to avoid. When you avoid what you're worried about or what you're anxious about, that worry or anxiety grows. If I'm anxious to fly, and I have an opportunity to fly and I don't fly, then the next time I have an opportunity to fly, that anxiety is bigger. If I want to ask that cute girl out or whatever, and I don't because I'm feeling anxious about it, well, the next time I want to ask somebody out, the anxiety is going to be bigger. And so when you cope through avoidance, your world gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Because you avoid more and more and more things. And so your world gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And so by doing what she said and coping and doing the thing, go ahead and ask the girl out or ask the boy out or go ahead and get on the plane. That there's tons of research that shows that most of the time what we worry about never actually happens. And so by doing it, we decrease the anxiety and your world gets bigger and bigger. So that's just another good point that I wanted to make sure to punctuate there.
Yeah, I actually encountered a study recently that said 85% of what we worry about never happens.
Yeah. I read a study not too long ago, and I've actually shared it on this podcast, but the study that I read said almost 90% of what we worry about never happens. It was like 88 point something % of the time. And then in the remaining 10% of the time that the worst case scenario does happen, people reported that almost 70% of the time it wasn't as bad as they thought.
Uh-huh.
So if you put that together, 90% of the time, your worry or anxiety is completely wasted. And in that remaining 10%, 70% of that time, it's also not warranted. So that means 3% of the time is our anxiety warranted. And so for those of you that struggle with anxiety, if you think about that, think about the time that you're spending worrying about something and how frequently it actually happens.
Yes, and I call it anticipation land. I encourage people to not get stuck in anticipation land. Anticipation is a waste of time. It's really, again, we're ruminating, we're predicting, we're really upset, and then you enter the situation and it's totally fine. Anticipation is always worse the reality.
Yes, it is. And yeah. And I don't know how many times in my own life or like with my wife or whatever, there will be this thought of, it's not gonna be very fun, or I'm not sure I really want to go or whatever. And then we go and we do it. And most of the time it's enjoyable. Most of the time it's a positive experience.
Yeah. And like you said, if it doesn't work out, it's still okay.
Right. Yeah. Very, very 3% of the time is what the research shows. About 3% of the time, your anxiety is going to be warranted. And for most of us, we worry, we put way more energy into that 3% than it warrants, than it
I
deserves.
actually have saying in my book, which is statistics are on your side.
I like that. I like that. Yeah, statistics are totally on your side. And I really like, for those of you that haven't seen this book yet, you ought to get it. But I really like how you've broken down into these simple questions. Like I just opened up to thinking out loud. Pick a worry that has been bothering you. You can choose one that you've already written about previously or select a fresh one. Be really specific. Now answer the following questions. Worry. So you write down what the worry is. What am I saying to myself right now about that worry? What story am I telling myself about this situation? What specifically am I afraid of? What is the worst possible outcome that could happen in this situation? Of all the worries going on in my head now, which one is trending the most? So it's so helpful just to break that down, because there again, things just start feeling really cloudy, right? When we start to worry. And so such a useful tool to just ask these simple questions to break it down into chunks that you can actually do something about.
Thank you. And the point of that exercise was to encourage people to really identify the automatic thought, the specific worry, so they could examine it from a distance and use strategies to challenge it and reframe it. And one of the other helpful pieces, I believe, is I provide in the book something called coping statement. Our coping statements are really sort of a shortcut. It's a quick reframe. If you can't kind of challenge your own thought, you're too overwhelmed, it's best to come up with just a really short cheerleading statement, such as, I've got this, I can do this, or this is rough, but I can handle it, or it's going to work out, it's going to be okay. And that's just a really simple kind of shortcut that we can use.
Absolutely. And most of us have these, like I said a second ago, have these sort of pet worries or pet cognitive distortions that we go to. And so if you keep stepping in the same puddle, then you can say, okay, I know I'm likely to step in this puddle. What am I going to do instead of that? Right. And then you can have some ammunition already prepared, so that when that button gets pushed, instead of going ahead and stepping in the same puddle again, is, my shoes are all wet. You can actually implement what you've already prepared to be able to avoid that. It's a super powerful tool.
Thank you. I think so. I think it's nice to have a variety of options, and especially for when you're feeling overwhelmed, the kind of idea of coping ahead can be useful, which is making a plan for how you're going to get through a situation, and having some of these coping statements handy can be helpful.
Yeah. So how treatable is anxiety?
Repeat that.
How treatable is anxiety?
How
treatable?
Treatable. Thank you. So anxiety, thankfully, is highly treatable, which is the good news. I think that when you're in the middle of it, it feels like, really hopeless. It can feel really overwhelming. But the good news is that these therapy approaches are really effective CBT, in particular, the gold standard when it comes to treating anxiety disorders, as well as ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, really effective. And medication can help as well. I think I need to bring that up. I always encourage people to try therapy because it's nice to see if you could do it without medication. But to combine medication with cognitive behavioral therapy can be even more potent.
Yeah, absolutely. And like she said a second ago, statistics are on your side. Anxiety is a plague among us, and the reality is that there are so many things that you can do if you're struggling with anxiety, and you do not have to stay trapped in anxiety. One of the things that is most challenging about anxiety is recognizing that it is anxiety, because we typically experience anxiety as a physical symptom, right? You have pain in your chest, or accelerated heart rate, or a pit in your stomach, or your face might flush, or so often when somebody experiences anxiety, they're feeling physically something, and I think that makes it difficult for people oftentimes to recognize. I don't know how to say that. The subjectivity or the needlessness of the anxiety.
Yes, I think what you're saying is that it's incredibly uncomfortable to have that sensation. It's really painful and uncomfortable. And in those moments, it seems like you can't feel better because these sensations are so overpowering. The good news is that, again, this is treatable in the sense that a lot of what we do for this kind of panic is we encourage folks to decatastrophize those sensations. We do psychoeducation and we provide information. These are just feelings that they may be uncomfortable. However, they don't mean anything. So sometimes I'll have a patient who maybe is having a basic heart, short of breath, and they're worried they're going to pass out or maybe have a heart attack. And having those thoughts about your feelings can make those feelings more intense. So a really simple solution is to reframe when you're having the feeling. This is just a feeling. This is my fight and flight system getting activated. This is anxiety. It can't hurt me. And to really just almost write it off and to move on to life.
Yeah. So any of you who are listening, everybody listening to this has gotten through every single anxious moment in their lives. Anxiety has not killed any one of you. And so as uncomfortable as it is to be anxious, and I'm not minimizing that, I've felt anxiety in my life. And as uncomfortable as that is, you've made it through every single one. And I think that just that is empowering to know that when you start feeling anxious, that you don't have to be afraid of anxiety. That's one of the things that I see with the people that I work with most is I call it meta anxiety. And so you've got the actual thing that you're worried about, and then you pile on top of that worrying that you're going to feel anxious about whatever it is. And that meta anxiety is what is totally unnecessary, right?
I couldn't agree more. I actually have a page on that in my book. I call it meta worry, which is worry about your worrying.
Yes.
Already stressed out, and now you're worried about being worried. And in addition, I have a page on discomfort about the idea that a lot of what we're concerned is going to happen when we feel anxious is that we might feel uncomfortable. And so maybe we'll cancel plans because being with this person might make us uncomfortable. And I'm not saying that you need to keep the plan if you really don't want to see the person, but I also want to encourage everyone that discomfort is temporary. We experience discomfort on a daily basis. It's not catastrophic, we get up early, we're tired. Yes, we could do it. We could be uncomfortable.
Yes. And just by reframing that and saying, it's okay to be uncomfortable. It's okay to feel anxious. It's even okay to have panic attacks. Any of you that have had a panic attack, they're horrible. Panic attacks are horrible. But again, if you've had them, you've gotten through every single panic attack that you've ever had. They don't last, and it's okay. One of the things that I like is taking the curious observer stance, right? If you can say, okay, I'm just going to observe and notice what I'm experiencing. And then you might say, oh, well, that's interesting. I have this patient to go see, or maybe it's, I've got this podcast, and I'm feeling a little nervous about it. Huh, that's interesting. Why am I feeling nervous about that? And when you can just take yourself out of that and be a curious observer about what's going on inside, it's super empowering.
It is. And we refer to that often as mindfulness, which is the skill of mindful detachment or diffusion. The strategy of looking at it from a distance without judgment, without reacting, without over-interpreting, and just being curious. That can be incredibly helpful. I completely agree.
Yeah, one of the most wonderful things about this life is that we get to feel. It is such a wonderful thing. It's a blessing, and it's a wonderful thing to be able to be happy, to be able to be sad, to be able to experience what it feels like to be embarrassed or turned on or nervous about something. The fact that we have the ability to feel is such a great thing in life. And it would be really, really sad to not have that. And consequently, we don't have to be afraid to feel.
Yes. And I'd like to follow that up by saying emotions have functions. Emotions have many different functions. They give us information. They give other people information, and they inspire us to take action. And emotions are adaptive. They really, from an evolutionary standpoint, are functional, which is why babies cry. They're trying to get attention.
It works. So
I think you're really bringing up such a good point that we need to accept their feelings and not reject them and not be afraid of them.
Yeah. One of the ways that I talk about mindfulness and that I like in mindfulness is, we mess up in two places. We mess up if we don't allow ourselves to acknowledge and feel what we're feeling. If we damn our feelings before we let them come in. And we also mess up if we damn them inside, if we don't let them flow through. And so if you can kind of think of that as letting yourself notice and experience what you're feeling and let those feelings flow through, that's a great way to picture mindfulness and letting it come in. Because if you damn them before they come in, you're still going to have to deal with them. But the only difference is then your brain has to deal with them on its own. And our brains are organs, and they don't do a very good job of that. And so by being purposeful and, that makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable. That's interesting. My heart is racing over that thought. You can acknowledge what you're feeling, and then you can let it flow through. And that's a good tool too.
Yes, and you should not keep your feeling inside. You should not reject them or suppress them. You should express them. You could do that by writing, journaling, or by venting. Really, so obviously, the there's a journaling component of my book because there is an intervention that we call worry time, which is making an appointment to worry, really setting aside time to get this thoughts and feeling out of your mind and onto paper. And it's really private, no one can see it. But if you're brave enough, I encourage all people to also tell loved ones, family members, therapists, friends, what's going on with you, to really air out those feelings and express them instead of keeping them inside.
Yeah. When they get stuck inside, that's when they cause harm. And it can be very good and healthy for relationships too, to share like that. Well, Terri, I've really enjoyed our time together. It's been really fun to talk to you and to look at your book, and you're doing great work. A couple of things. Any closing thoughts, and then also, how can people find you?
Can you repeat that?
How can people find you?
Yes, yeah. So people can find me via my website, which is drterribacow.com, and also on Instagram. Well, I'm quite fond of, and my account on Instagram is at Dr. Terri Bacow. I am also on Facebook, Terri Bacow Private Practice, and on LinkedIn. And those are the best ways, those social media and my website.
Good.
My book can be found on Amazon. It's also in stores at Barnes & Noble and Urban Outfitters.
Great. Any closing thoughts that you would like to share?
Yes, I would like to share the importance of self-compassion, which is, I think we are all way, way too hard on ourselves. I'm way too self-critical, and this hurts us. It doesn't help us. It's not productive to get so angry with ourselves. And I think one of the maybe less recognized way to deal with anxiety is to really give yourself a break, and to have compassion for yourself, and be kind to yourself. I think that's incredibly important.
I like that. Yeah. Did you guys notice what she said about how many people struggle with anxiety? What was the number? What was the number?
Oh, I believe it was about 40 million.
Yeah. 40 million Americans struggle with anxiety. You're not alone in this struggle. And so having compassion on that, so often we think that we're the only ones that are living what we're living. And that's a really good point. Well, thank you very, very much. We'll publish this again. You can see how to spell Terri. It's Terri. Bacow is Bacow. So check her out. Great resource. I highly recommend it. And I appreciate you joining us today.